When billionaire Cassian Ward's most treasured memory is swept away in a flood, a stranger returns his father's car keys and awakens something he thought was lost forever. But can love survive when two worlds collide? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Rain pounded against the windows of Cassian Ward's penthouse as he stared at the news on his television. The reporter's voice was grim as footage played of the storm's destruction downtown. "The flash flooding has caused massive damage throughout the city," the reporter said. "Several vehicles were swept away by the current, including this luxury Aston Martin from the Riverside Towers parking garage." Cassian's heart dropped as he watched his sleek black car being carried away by murky water. It wasn't just any car. His father had given it to him just days before his sudden heart attack 3 months ago. Now it was gone, swallowed by the storm. Like everything else his father had left behind, his phone rang. It was Jeremy, his assistant. "Mr. Ward, I just saw the news." "I'm so sorry about your car," Jeremy said. "Should I contact the insurance company?" "Yes," Cassian replied, his voice flat. "Handle it. The preliminary damage estimate is around 300,000, sir. They can start processing the claim immediately." "It's not about the money, Jeremy." Cassian hung up and walked to his bar, pouring himself a scotch. At 40 years old, he had everything anyone could want. A successful design firm with offices in 12 countries, a penthouse overlooking the city, more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes. But standing there alone, watching rain streak down glass walls, he felt empty. His phone buzzed with messages from friends and business associates offering condolences about the car. None of them understood. It wasn't about the car itself. It was about his father's final gift being ripped away before he was ready to let go. 2 days later, Cassian sat in his corner office reviewing design proposals when his assistant knocked on the door. "Sir, there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's about your car." Cassian looked up with mild interest. "Insurance agent?" "No, sir. She wouldn't say exactly. Just that she needed to speak with you personally." "Fine. Send her in." A moment later, the door opened and Cassian found himself staring at a woman unlike any who typically walked through his office. She wore mud-stained jeans, work boots, and a simple brown jacket. Her dark hair was pulled back in braids and, despite her obvious attempt to clean up, she looked like she'd been through a war zone. "Mr. Ward?" she asked, her voice softer than he expected. "Yes," he answered, standing. "And you are?" "Talia Greer." She stepped forward, pulling something from her pocket. "I found these washed into the alley behind my building. I thought maybe someone would want them back." She held out her hand. In her palm sat a set of keys with the Aston Martin logo. Cassian stared at them, unable to move or speak. He recognized the scratched leather fob his father had handed him with a smile. "For when you need to remember, life isn't all about boardrooms," his father had said. "How did you find me?" Cassian finally asked. Talia shrugged. "The key fob had the Vine number. I called the dealership, told them I found the keys to a car that got swept away in the flood. They put me in touch with your office." She placed the keys on his desk. "That's all, I just wanted to return them." Cassian picked up the keys, feeling their weight. "The car is gone, crushed under a collapsed wall according to the recovery team." "I'm sorry," she said, and the simple sincerity in her voice caught him off guard. "It must have been special to you." "It was my father's. He gave it to me before he died." The words slipped out before he could stop them. Talia nodded. "Then I'm especially glad I found the keys. Sometimes it's the small things that matter most." She turned to leave. "Wait," Cassian said. "Let me give you a reward." She paused, looking back at him with clear brown eyes. "No need. You're lucky, you know. Most things don't come back once the water takes them." Then she was gone, leaving Cassian standing there with the keys in his hand, feeling something he couldn't identify stir inside him. That night he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the woman, Talia, and her simple act of kindness. No agenda, no attempt to impress. She hadn't even seemed to recognize who he was, despite his face appearing regularly in business magazines and local news. A week later, Cassian found himself driving down unfamiliar streets in the older part of town. He'd had his assistant track down an address for Talia Greer, claiming it was to send a thank you gift. Instead, he was now parking his Range Rover in front of a small cafe with a faded sign reading, Greer Family Bakery. Through the window he could see Talia behind the counter, laughing with an older woman as they arranged pastries in a display case. She looked different here, relaxed, in her element, with flour on her cheek and her braids pulled up in a loose bun. Taking a deep breath, Cassian stepped inside. A bell jingled, and the smell of fresh bread and coffee enveloped him. Talia looked up and her smile faltered in surprise. "Mr. Ward?" "Please, call me Cassian," he said, suddenly feeling out of place in his $1,000 suit and polished shoes. The older woman nudged Talia. "You know this handsome man, honey. Aunt Margaret, this is the man who owned those car keys I found," Talia explained. "Mr. Ward, I mean Cassian, this is my aunt. She owns this place." Margaret beamed. "Any friend of Talia's is welcome here. Sit down, I'll bring you some fresh apple cake." Before he could protest, Margaret disappeared into the kitchen, leaving him alone with Talia. "What brings you to our neighborhood?" Talia asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "I wanted to thank you properly," Cassian said. "For the keys," she raised an eyebrow. "You drove across town to say thank you. You could have called." "I don't have your number. Your assistant found my address. I'm sure he could have found my phone too." Cassian smiled despite himself. "You're right. The truth is, I was curious." "About what?" "About you," he admitted. "Not many people would go to the trouble of returning something like that, especially when the car itself is gone." Talia shrugged. "My dad always said our character shows in what we do when nobody's looking." She studied him. "Were you close to your father?" The question caught him off guard. Women he met typically asked about his business, his penthouse, his vacation plans. "Not about his father." "Yes," he said quietly, "though maybe not as close as we should have been." Margaret returned with a slice of cake and coffee. "On the house for Talia's friend." "Thank you, but please let me pay," Cassian insisted. Margaret waved him off. "First visit is always free. It's how we get you hooked." As he ate the surprisingly delicious cake, Cassian watched Talia work. She moved with purpose, helping customers, fixing a wobbly table, adjusting a ceiling fan. When the cafe emptied briefly, she sat across from him. "So, what do you do when you're not returning lost?" "Keys to strangers?" he asked. "I work here most days," she said. "I'm also a seamstress. I have a little shop in the back where I alter clothes and make custom pieces." "You're talented," he observed, nodding toward a display of handmade scarves and bags. "I get by," she said with a smile. "What about you? Besides owning fancy cars and wearing expensive suits." "I run a design firm, mainly architectural and industrial design." "That sounds important," she said without a hint of being impressed. "It can be," he replied, surprised by how refreshing her lack of awe felt. "Mainly it's a lot of meetings and emails." A customer entered and Talia stood. "Duty calls, it was nice seeing you again, Cassian." He finished his coffee, left a generous tip, and headed for the door. Then he stopped. "Talia?" She looked up from wiping a table. "Yes? Would you have dinner with me sometime?" The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise her. Her expression turned guarded. "Why?" she asked directly. No woman had ever asked him that before. Usually they just said yes before he finished asking. "Because I'd like to get to know you better," he answered honestly. She studied him for a long moment. "I don't date clients or customers." "I'm neither. I'm just someone returning for more of your aunt's cake." That made her smile. "Friday, 7 o'clock, but I choose the place." "Deal." As Cassian drove back to his office, he couldn't explain the lightness he felt. For the first time since his father died, he was looking forward to something that had nothing to do with work. Friday night found Cassian standing nervously outside a small Italian restaurant in Talia's neighborhood. He'd almost called his driver out of habit, but decided to take a taxi instead. Talia arrived wearing a simple blue dress, her braids loose around her shoulders. "You came," she said, sounding slightly surprised. "I said I would," he replied, opening the door for her. Inside, the owner greeted Talia with a hug. "Your usual table, Miss Talia?" "Please, Marco, this is Cassian." Marco led them to a corner table with a checkered tablecloth and a candle in a wine bottle. It was nothing like the five-star restaurants Cassian frequented, but somehow it felt more genuine. Over pasta and wine, they talked. Cassian told her about growing up with a father who built a company from nothing, about the pressure to follow in his footsteps, about taking over the firm at 30 and expanding it worldwide. In turn, Talia shared stories of being raised by her aunt after her parents died in a car accident when she was 12, of learning to sew from her grandmother, of dreams to open her own boutique someday. "The storms always scare you?" she asked when thunder rumbled outside. Cassian paused. "Not the storms themselves, just what they take away." She nodded, understanding. "Your father, what was he like?" No one had asked him that in months. Everyone at the funeral had talked about his father's business achievements, his wealth, his connections. No one had asked what he was actually like. He was complicated, Cassian said slowly. Driven. Hard to please sometimes, but also capable of incredible generosity. He loved classic cars and terrible jokes. He could be working 80 hours one week and then disappear fishing for days the next. Talia smiled. "He sounds like someone who knew how to live." "I'm not sure I got that part from him," Cassian admitted. "I got his work ethic, but not his ability to stop and enjoy life." The conversation flowed easily through dessert and coffee. When they finished, Cassian insisted on paying, and for once Talia didn't argue. Outside, rain had started falling again. "Let me drive you home," Cassian offered. "I live just 2 blocks away," she said. "I'll be fine." "At least take my umbrella," she laughed. "I don't mind the rain. It reminds me we can't control everything, and that's okay." She paused, then added, "I had a nice time, Cassian." "So did I," he said, surprised by how much he meant it. "Good night," she said, then stood on tiptoe and kissed his cheek before turning and walking away into the gentle rain. Cassian watched her go, touching his cheek where her lips had been. For the first time in years, he felt something break open. Inside him, some wall he hadn't even realized he'd built. He pulled out his phone to call for a car, then changed his mind. Instead, he started walking in the rain, letting himself get soaked, and somehow feeling more alive than he had in months. Over the next few weeks, Cassian found himself drawn to Talia's cafe more and more often. Each visit started as a simple coffee break, but he'd end up staying for hours, watching her work and talking whenever she had a free moment. "Don't you have a company to run?" Talia asked one afternoon as she wiped down the counter next to where he sat. Cassian smiled, looking up from his laptop. "I'm working remotely today." "You've been working remotely 3 days this week," she pointed out. "Your employees must wonder where their boss disappeared to." "They know how to reach me," he said, closing his laptop. "Besides, the coffee here is better than at the office." Aunt Margaret, who was arranging cookies in the display case, chuckled. "Honey, this man isn't coming back for my coffee, though my apple cake might have something to do with it." Talia blushed and shot her aunt a warning look. Cassian had noticed this about her. She became uncomfortable whenever anyone mentioned the growing connection between them. Later that evening, after the cafe closed, Cassian helped Talia stack chairs on tables while Margaret counted the day's earnings. "You really don't have to stay and help," Talia said. "I want to," he replied simply. "Besides, my penthouse is too quiet sometimes." Talia paused, studying him. "You've never invited me there, you know." "Would you come if I did?" She considered. "This? Maybe. But I'd feel out of place among all that luxury. The way I felt here at first? That's different. This place welcomes everyone." Cassian nodded toward Margaret. "Because of her. And you." Margaret interrupted their conversation. "You two should go out and enjoy the evening. I can finish up here." "But Aunt Marg—" "No buts," the older woman insisted. "You work too hard. Go have some fun." Outside, the evening was cool and clear. They walked without any particular destination, passing small shops and local restaurants. "Tell me about your father," Talia said suddenly. "I thought I already did." "You told me facts about him, not how you felt about him." Cassian was silent for a moment. "I admired him, feared him sometimes, wanted to make him proud." He paused. "When he died, I realized there were so many things I never asked him. So many conversations we never had. Like what? Like whether he was happy, whether all the success was worth the sacrifices. Cassian looked at her. What about your parents? Talia's face softened. My mum was a teacher. My dad fixed cars. They weren't rich, but our house was always full of laughter. Her voice grew quieter. After the accident, I kept expecting them to walk through the door. It took years before I stopped looking up whenever I heard someone enter a room. Cassian reached for her hand, and she let him take it. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached a small park. Have you ever been to the coast? He asked as they sat on a bench. Once, when I was little, I remember being afraid of the waves. I have a beach house about 2 hours from here, Cassian said. Nothing fancy, but it's peaceful. Would you like to see it someday? Talia looked at him with careful eyes. Cassian, what are we doing? What do you mean? This. Us. You're a CEO who lives in a penthouse. I'm a seamstress who lives above a cafe. We're from different worlds. Does that matter? It might, she said honestly. I've dated men with money before. It always ended the same way. They get tired of slumming it, or they'd want to remake me into something I'm not. Cassian turned to face her. Is that what you think I'm doing, slumming it? I don't know what you're doing, she admitted. That's what worries me. I'm spending time with someone who makes me feel like myself, he said. Not like Cassian Ward, CEO, just Cassian. She smiled slightly. And who is just Cassian? I'm Hugh. Still figuring that out, he replied honestly. But I'd like your help doing it. The next Saturday, Cassian picked Talia up in a modest sedan rather than one of his luxury cars. She raised an eyebrow when she saw it. Rental, she asked. No, it's mine. I just don't drive it much. She got in, tossing her small overnight bag in the back seat. Where are we going? I thought we'd take that trip to the beach house, he said. Unless you've changed your mind. No, she said, though she looked nervous, and I haven't. The drive was pleasant, with Talia choosing music on the radio and Cassian telling stories about his early days at the company. When they arrived, the beach house turned out to be a simple cottage on a quiet stretch of shore. This is not what I expected, Talia admitted as they walked inside. What did you expect? Glass walls, marble floors, a helicopter pad. Cassian laughed. That's more my father's style. I bought this place after he died. No one from work knows about it. The cottage was cozy, with worn furniture and shelves of books. Large windows looked out over the water, and a wooden deck wrapped around the back. It's beautiful, Talia said, walking to the window. So peaceful. Hungry? Cassian asked, heading to the kitchen. I brought groceries. Talia followed him. You cook? Not well, he admitted, but I can manage pasta without burning the house down. She laughed. Let me help. Together they prepared a simple meal. Cassian was surprised by how comfortable it felt, chopping vegetables beside her, their shoulders occasionally brushing, sharing tasks without needing many words. Over dinner on the deck, they watched the sun begin to set over the water. You never talk about your mother, Talia observed. She left when I was 10, Cassian said. Decided corporate life and motherhood weren't for her. Last I heard, she was living in Europe, with husband number 3. I'm sorry. Don't be, it was a long time ago. Still hurts though, doesn't it? Cassian looked at her, surprised by her perception. Sometimes. Mainly, I've just tried not to be like her. How so? By not walking away from responsibilities. By finishing what I start. Talia nodded. Is that why you never take time off? Why you work 80-hour weeks? Maybe, he admitted. Or maybe I just never found anything worth taking time off for. And now? She asked quietly. Instead of answering, Cassian reached across the table and took her hand. After dinner, they walked along the shore as darkness fell. The waves gently lapped at the sand, and stars began appearing overhead. When I was little, Talia said, my grandmother told me that stars are where all the love in the world goes when it has nowhere else to be. All those little lights are love stories looking down on us. That's a nice thought, Cassian said. What do you think happens to love when it ends? Talia looked at him. Who says it has to end? Back at the cottage, Cassian built a small fire in the fireplace while Talia made hot chocolate in the kitchen. When she handed him a mug, their fingers touched and neither pulled away. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said softly. "Thank you for coming." They sat close on the sofa, the firelight casting warm shadows across their faces. When Cassian leaned closer, Talia didn't pull away. Their kiss was gentle at first, then deeper, filled with feelings neither had fully acknowledged. The next morning, Cassian woke to find Talia standing on the deck in his borrowed shirt, watching the sunrise over the water. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and she leaned back against him. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly. She turned in his arms. "No." "You?" "Only that we can't stay here forever." Talia smiled. "Reality always comes back, doesn't it?" "It doesn't have to be the same reality," he said, kissing her forehead. When they returned to the city that evening, something had changed between them. No more pretending they were just friends. No more denying the feelings that had been growing since that rainy day when she'd walked into his office with his keys. The following weeks were the happiest Cassian could remember. He spent evenings at Talia's small apartment above the cafe, where she taught him to cook simple meals. She showed him how to fix things with his hands instead of calling someone to do it. "The ceiling is leaking again," she said one night during a rainstorm. Cassian looked up at the water stain. "I'll call a repair service in the morning." "Or," she suggested, "you could help me fix it now." Before he knew it, Cassian was on a ladder in jeans and an old t-shirt, patching the leak while Talia handed him tools. His hands got dirty, his hair fell in his eyes, and when they finished, the repair wasn't perfect. But he felt prouder than after closing million-dollar deals. In turn, Cassian introduced Talia to parts of his world. He took her to art galleries and jazz clubs. He brought her old books that had been his father's. One night, he convinced her to join him for dinner at Elliott's, the five-star restaurant where he usually entertained clients. Talia wore a simple black dress she had made herself. Despite her initial nervousness, she carried herself with natural dignity that made heads turn. "Everyone's staring," she whispered, as the maitre d' led them to Cassian's regular table. "Because you're beautiful," he replied. After dinner, as they walked to his car, a photographer stepped out from behind a parked vehicle. "Mr. Ward, who's your date? Look this way, please." The flash went off before either could react. Cassian quickly hustled Talia into the car and drove away. "What was that about?" she asked, looking shaken. "Just a paparazzo," he said, trying to sound casual. "It happens sometimes. I'm sorry." "Why would anyone care who you're having dinner with?" Cassian hesitated. "My company is in the news a lot, especially since my father died. The business press likes to keep tabs on me." Talia was quiet for a moment. "I didn't really think about that part of your life." That night, as they lay in bed at his penthouse, Cassian watched Talia sleep. She seemed out of place among his expensive furniture and art, yet somehow she belonged here more than anyone ever had. She made his sterile, perfect apartment feel like a home. He found himself imagining a future with her in it, mornings together, holidays, maybe even children someday. The thought should have terrified him, but instead, it felt right. The next morning, Cassian woke early for a meeting. He left Talia sleeping, kissing her forehead before heading to the office. On his desk, he found several tabloid newspapers with red circles around items his assistant thought he should see. His blood ran cold when he saw the headline, "Billionaire's charity case, who is Cassian Ward's mystery woman?" Below was the photo from the previous night, along with speculation about Talia being from the wrong side of town, and questions about whether this was a passing phase for the notoriously commitment-phobic CEO. Cassian immediately called his PR team. "Get these pulled, now." "We can't, sir," his PR director said. "They're already in circulation. The best we can do is issue a statement." "Then do it. Make it clear that my personal life is private." As Cassian hung up, his phone buzzed with a text from Talia. "We need to talk. Come to the cafe when you can." Her tone worried him. He cancelled his meetings and drove straight there, only to find the cafe unusually busy. Photographers and curious onlookers crowded the sidewalk. Inside, Margaret was trying to serve customers while fending off intrusive questions. When she saw Cassian, Her usually friendly face hardened. "She's upstairs," Margaret said coldly. "She's been crying all morning." Cassian took the back stairs to Talia's apartment and knocked on her door. When she opened it, her eyes were red. "Talia, I'm so sorry about this. I had no idea." "Did you see what they wrote?" she asked, holding up a newspaper. "They called me your latest distraction, your charity project." "It's garbage," he said. "Tabloid nonsense." "Is it?" she asked. "What exactly am I to you, Cassian? A novelty? Something different to pass the time?" "You know that's not true." "Do I?" Tears filled her eyes. "I told you relationships like this don't work. People from your world and people from mine don't mix." "That's not fair," he said. "What we have is real." "Then why has no one from your life ever met me?" she asked. "Why do we always come to my neighborhood, my restaurants? Are you ashamed of me?" "Of course not." "Then why am I only now appearing in your public life? As some unnamed mystery woman you're slumming with?" Cassian reached for her, but she stepped back. "I need some time," she said quietly. "To think." "Talia, please. Just go, Cassian." The reporters are waiting for their next headline. Heart-heavy, Cassian left. As he pushed through the crowd outside, ignoring shouted questions, rain began to fall, hard and sudden, like the day they'd met. Back at his office, Cassian stared. At the storm through his window, the keys to his father's lost car sitting on his desk, like a reminder of everything that mattered and everything he stood to lose. 3 days passed without a word from Talia. Cassian called and texted, but she didn't respond. He drove by the cafe twice, only to find the "closed for family reasons" sign on the door. His world, once so orderly and predictable, now felt like it was crumbling around him. At work, he couldn't focus. His assistant Jeremy noticed his distraction. During an important client meeting, "Mr. Ward, are you feeling all right?" Jeremy asked afterward. "You seem elsewhere." "I'm fine," Cassian said automatically, then sighed. "No, I'm not fine. Has the PR team made any progress with those tabloid stories?" Jeremy shifted uncomfortably. "They've issued statements, but honestly, sir, the story's getting bigger. People are curious about who she is." "Her name is Talia," Cassian snapped. "Not she. Not mystery woman, Talia Greer." "Yes, sir. I'll make sure the team knows." That evening, Cassian sat alone in his penthouse, staring at his phone. Finally, he dialed a number he rarely used. "Henderson Residence," answered an elderly voice. "Martha, it's Cassian Ward. Is Frank available?" "Oh, Mr. Ward. One moment, please." A minute later, a gruff voice came on the line. "Cassian, is everything all right? You never call on weeknights." Frank Henderson had been his father's best friend and was the only board member Cassian truly trusted. "I need some advice, Frank. Personal, not business." "Well, that's a first," Frank chuckled. "Come over. Martha's made her famous pot roast. And there's plenty." An hour later, Cassian sat in Frank's comfortable living room, a plate balanced on his knee. The Henderson home was modest compared to where most of his business associates lived, but it had always felt more welcoming than any mansion. "So," Frank said, setting down his fork, "what's got you looking like you've lost your best friend?" Cassian took a deep breath. "I met someone." Frank's eyebrows rose. "A woman? Well, hallelujah. Martha, come in here. Cassian's met a woman." Martha appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dishcloth. "It's about time." "Who is she? When do we meet her?" "That's the problem," Cassian said. "I think I've already lost her." He explained everything. How they met, their growing relationship, and the tabloid disaster. "The worst part is," she thinks, "I'm ashamed of her," he finished, "that I've been hiding her." Frank and Martha exchanged glances. "Well," Frank said carefully, "have you been?" "Of course not," Cassian protested, then paused. "At least, I didn't think I was." "But you never introduced her to your friends," Martha pointed out, "or invited her to any work functions." "I was protecting her from all that. The scrutiny, the judgment." Frank leaned forward. "Son, I knew your father for 40 years. Good man, but he always kept his personal life and business life separate. Never let anyone see the whole picture. Seems to me you picked up that habit." Cassian stared at his plate. "I just wanted something that was mine. Something real and private that wasn't about business or appearances. "And what does Talia want?" Martha asked gently. I don't know," Cassian admitted. "I never asked." Frank nodded. "Your father made that mistake with your mother. Never asked what she wanted, just assumed. By the time he figured it out, she was already gone." The words hit Cassian like a physical blow. "I'm not my father." "No," Frank agreed, "but you're his son, and sometimes we repeat patterns without even knowing it." Martha refilled Cassian's coffee cup. "If this woman matters to you, truly matters, then you need to decide what you're willing to change, not for her, but for both of you." Driving home, Cassian couldn't stop thinking about Frank's words. Had he been keeping Talia separate from his real life? Had he, without realizing it, been treating their relationship as something temporary? The next morning he called an emergency board meeting. When the directors were assembled, Cassian stood at the head of the table. "I'll keep this brief," he began. "For the past few months I've been seeing someone. Her name is Talia Greer. She's a seamstress and works at her aunt's cafe. The tabloids have picked up the story and portrayed our relationship in a disrespectful way. I want to make it clear that Ms. Greer is important to me, and I expect everyone associated with this company to treat her with respect." The room was silent for a moment. Then Barbara Chen, the marketing director, spoke up. "May I make a suggestion, Cassian?" "Go ahead. The Hammond Foundation Gala is next week. All the major players in the city will be there. If you're serious about this relationship, bring her as your date. Make a public statement." Several board members nodded in agreement. Cassian considered the idea. The gala was the biggest social event of the year, with press coverage and the city's elite in attendance. "Thank you, Barbara. That's an excellent suggestion." He looked around the table. "Any objections?" No one spoke. Frank, sitting at the far end, gave him a small nod of approval. After the meeting, Cassian headed straight to Talia's cafe. This time it was open, but Aunt Margaret was alone behind the counter. "She's not here," Margaret said when she saw him. "And even if she was, I'm not sure she'd want to see you." "Please, Margaret, I need to talk to her." The older woman studied him for a long moment. "She's at the community center, teaching a sewing class for kids." "Thank you." The community center was a plain brick building a few blocks away. Inside, Cassian followed the sound of children's laughter to a room where Talia sat surrounded by about a dozen kids, helping them with simple sewing projects. She looked up when the door opened, and her smile faded when she saw him. She said something to the children, then walked over. "What are you doing here?" she asked quietly. "I needed to see you," Cassian said. "To talk." "I'm in the middle of a class." "I'll wait," she sighed. "Fine, we're done in 20 minutes. Cassian sat in the back of the room, watching as Talia patiently helped each child. She was different here, more confident, completely in her element. One little girl proudly held up a lopsided fabric flower, and Talia praised it like it was a masterpiece. When the class ended and the children had gone, Talia began cleaning up scraps of fabric. "You're good with them," Cassian said, helping her. "They're good kids. Most of them have tough home lives. This gives them something they can control, something they can create." When the room was tidy, she turned to face him. "So, talk." "I miss you," he said simply. "Is that all?" "No." Cassian took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about what you said, about me keeping you separate from my world. You were right." Talia crossed her arms. And I was afraid." That caught her attention. "Afraid of what?" "Of you seeing that part of my life and not wanting it, not wanting me, of you realizing how empty so much of it is." Talia's expression softened slightly. "Cassian, please, let me finish," he interrupted. "I've spent my whole life trying to be someone my father would be proud of, someone important, but with you I'm just me. And for the first time that feels like enough." She was quiet for a moment. "I never asked you to choose between your life and me. I know. But I was still keeping them separate. And that's not fair to you." He stepped closer. "I told my board about us today. I made it clear that you're important to me." Surprise flashed across her face. "You did that?" "Yes. And there's something else." He took her hands in his. The Hammond Foundation Gala is next week. Every important person in the city will be there. I want you to come with me, as my date." Talia pulled her hands away. "So I can be paraded in front of all the rich and powerful people? No, thank you. That's not what I meant, isn't it? You want to show everyone that you're not ashamed of the woman from the wrong side of town?" Cassian ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I'm doing this all wrong. I don't want to parade you anywhere. I want to stop hiding how I feel about you." "And how do you feel?" she challenged. "I love you," he said, the words coming out before he could think about them. "I love you, Talia." She stared at him, clearly not expecting that. "Cassian, you don't have to say it back," he said quickly, "but I needed you to know. This isn't about appearances or what other people think. It's about not wanting to spend another day without you." Talia's eyes filled with tears. "I need time to think." "Take all the time you need," he said, though his heart was sinking. "Just know that I'm here, waiting." The next day, Cassian threw himself into work, trying not to check his phone every 5 minutes. Around noon, his assistant knocked on his door. "Sir, there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but send her in," Cassian said, hope rising in his chest. But it wasn't Talia who walked through the door. It was Aunt Margaret, looking determined. "Miss Greer," Cassian said, standing. "Is everything all right? Is Talia—" "She's fine," Margaret interrupted. "Confused, but fine. I'm here to talk to you. Please sit down." Margaret settled into the chair, across from his desk. "I've known my niece her whole life. Watched her grow up, helped raise her after her parents died. She's strong, but she's been hurt before." "I would never hurt her," Cassian said. "Not intentionally, maybe, but your worlds are very different. That doesn't matter to me, doesn't it?" Margaret fixed him with a shrewd look. "You live in a penthouse. She lives above a cafe. You attend galas. She teaches sewing to underprivileged kids. How long before those differences start to matter?" Cassian leaned forward. "Margaret, I love her, not despite those differences, but partly because of them. She reminds me of what's real. And what happens when the novelty wears off?" "It's not about novelty," he insisted. "It's about how I feel when I'm with her, like I'm home." Margaret studied him for a long moment. "My sister, Talia's mother, used to say you can tell a person's character by what they do when no one's watching." She paused. "Talia told me how you met, how she returned your keys." "She did a kindness for a stranger," Cassian said. "Yes, that's who she is." Margaret stood. "The question is, who are you when no one's watching, when there are no board meetings, or press releases or galas? That's what Talia needs to know." After Margaret left, Cassian sat thinking about her words. Who was he when no one was watching? For most of his life, someone was always watching. Employees, competitors, the press. But in those quiet moments with Talia, he'd felt like his true self for the first time. How could he show her that? That evening, Cassian drove to the beach house alone. He stood on the deck, watching the waves and remembering how Talia had looked in the sunrise. On the drive back to the city, he knew what he needed to do. The next morning, he cancelled all his meetings and drove to a neighborhood he'd never visited before. The first shop he entered was a small bookstore. "Can I help you find something?" asked the elderly owner. "Yes," Cassian said. "I need books on cooking, simple recipes for beginners." Next, he went to a hardware store and bought tools. Hammer, screwdrivers, a small toolkit. At a nursery, he purchased potted herbs like the ones Talia grew on her windowsill. Back at his penthouse, he cleared a shelf for the books and made space in his immaculate kitchen for the herbs. He changed into jeans and an old t-shirt, then opened his laptop. Hours later, Cassian stood back and looked at what he'd accomplished. It wasn't perfect. The shelf he'd installed was slightly crooked, and the pasta sauce he'd made had too much garlic, but it was honest. It was real. He picked up his phone and, after a moment's hesitation, sent Talia a photo of his sauce-splattered kitchen and the lopsided shelf with the caption, "Learning to fix things with my own hands. Turns out it's harder than it looks." For hours there was no response. Then, just as he was getting ready for bed, his phone buzzed with a message. "The shelf is crooked, but it's a good start." Hope flickered in his chest. The next day, he sent her another photo, this time of the herbs on his windowsill. "Trying to grow something besides a company?" Her reply came faster this time. Don't overwater them. This continued for several days. Small messages, photos of his attempts at making a normal life in his ultra-modern penthouse. No grand declarations, no pressure, just little glimpses into who he was trying to be. 5 days after their conversation, at the community center, Cassian was making another attempt at pasta sauce when there was a knock at his door. When he opened it, Talia stood there. "Your security let me up," she said. "I hope that's okay." "Of course," he said, trying to contain his joy at seeing her. "Come in." She walked inside, noticing the changes immediately. The books, the herbs, the less-than-perfect shelf, the kitchen where evidence of his cooking attempts was clear. "Something's burning," she pointed out. Cassian rushed to the stove, pulling a smoking pot off the burner. "I got distracted," he admitted. Talia laughed, and the sound filled the penthouse like music. "You really are a terrible cook." "I'm learning," he said, dumping the burnt sauce in the sink. "Slowly." She moved closer, studying his face. "Why are you doing all this?" "Because I want to be someone worthy of you," he said honestly. "Not just a CEO in a suit, but a real person. Someone who can fix things and cook dinner and grow herbs. Someone who doesn't need an assistant to manage his whole life." Talia reached up and touched his cheek, wiping away a smudge of tomato sauce. "I never asked you to change. I know I'm doing it for me too, because I like who I am when I'm with you." She looked around the penthouse again, taking in all the small changes. "The gala," she said finally. "When is it?" "This Saturday." "But Talia, we don't have to go if you don't want to." She took a deep breath. "If I go, it won't be to make a statement or to prove anything to anyone. It would be because I want to be with you. Because I love you too." Cassian felt his heart. "So, you do?" "Yes," she said simply. "Though clearly I'll need to teach you how to cook properly." He laughed, pulling her into his arms. "I'll be a willing student." As they stood in his kitchen, holding each other close, rain began tapping against the windows. Gentle at first, then stronger. They both turned to look outside. "Seems fitting," Talia said. "Rain brought us together. And I'm never letting it take you away," Cassian promised, kissing her. Saturday night arrived with clear skies and a warm breeze. The Hammond Foundation Gala was being held at the Grand Hotel with red carpets and photographers waiting outside. Cassian adjusted his bow, tying nervously as his driver approached the venue. "Are you sure about this?" he asked Talia one last time. She sat beside him in a midnight blue gown she had made herself. Simple, elegant, and entirely her own creation. Her braids were swept up, with a few tendrils framing her face. "I'm sure," she said, squeezing his hand. "And stop asking before I change my mind." The car stopped at the entrance. Camera flashes began immediately as attendants opened the door. Cassian stepped out first, then turned to offer his hand to Talia. When she emerged, there was a moment of silence before the cameras began clicking frantically. Cassian kept her hand firmly in his as they walked the red carpet. "Mr. Ward, who's—" "Your date," called one reporter. Cassian stopped and smiled. "This is Talia Greer, the woman I love." Talia looked up at him, surprise and love mingling in her eyes. And as they continued into the gala, surrounded by whispers and stares, Cassian had never felt more certain of anything in his life. This woman, who had found his keys in the rain, who had seen him for who he truly was the only treasure that mattered. Inside the Hammond Foundation Gala, heads turned as Cassian and Talia entered the grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead, and the city's wealthiest and most powerful people mingled in designer gowns and tuxedos. "Everyone's staring," Talia whispered, gripping Cassian's arm a little tighter. "Let them," he said, smiling down at her. "They're just jealous." Barbara Chen, Cassian's marketing director, approached them with a warm smile. "Cassian, and you must be Talia. I'm Barbara." She extended her hand. "It's wonderful to finally meet you." "Nice to meet you too," Talia replied, relaxing slightly at the genuine welcome. Throughout the evening, Cassian introduced Talia to his colleagues and business associates. Some were politely curious, others openly surprised, but Cassian remained proudly by her side, When Frank Henderson arrived with his wife Martha, they embraced Talia like an old friend. "So you're the woman who's finally made this workaholic smile," Frank said, patting her hand. "About time someone knocked some sense into him." "I'm trying my best," Talia laughed. As the night progressed, Talia found herself in conversation with the wives of several board members. They asked about her work at the cafe and her sewing. "You made this dress yourself?" one woman asked, clearly impressed. "It's beautiful." "Thank you," Talia said. "I've been sewing since I was a child." "My daughter is getting married next summer," another woman said. "I've been looking for someone to make some custom alterations to her grandmother's wedding dress. Would you be interested?" Before Talia could answer, a tall, elegantly dressed woman approached their group. She had to be in her 60s, but her face was surgically preserved, and diamonds glittered at her throat and wrists. "Well, well," the woman said, her voice carrying a hint of mockery. "You must be Cassian's new friend." "I'm Victoria Harrington, an old friend of his father's." The other women suddenly found reasons to drift away, leaving Talia alone with Victoria. "It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Harrington," Talia said politely. Victoria looked her up and down. "Quite a fairy tale, isn't it? The seamstress and the CEO, like something from a storybook." "I don't think of our relationship that way," Talia replied, keeping her voice steady. "No? How do you think of it?" Victoria sipped her champagne. "Cassian has always been ambitious, just like his father. Everything they do serves a purpose. What are you suggesting?" "Nothing, dear. I just find it interesting that right when Cassian is trying to secure the Westwood contract, a project in a neighborhood very much like yours, he suddenly shows up with a girlfriend from the community." She made air quotes around the last word. Talia felt her chest tighten. "You don't know anything about us." "Perhaps not," Victoria conceded with a cold smile. "But I've known the ward men for decades. They use people. It's what made them successful." Before Talia could respond, Cassian appeared at her side. "Victoria," he said, his voice cool, "I see you've met Talia." Victoria's smile became artificial. "Yes, charming girl, so authentic." "If you'll excuse us," Cassian said, taking Talia's arm, "the orchestra is starting." He led her to the dance floor, where other couples were already gathering for a waltz. As he took her in his arms, he noticed her troubled expression. "What did Victoria say to you?" he asked quietly. "Nothing important," Talia said, not meeting his eyes. "Talia, please, I know that look," she sighed. "She mentioned something about a Westwood contract in my neighborhood." Cassian's face darkened. She had no right to bring that up. Talia stopped, dancing. "So it's true, there is a contract?" "Yes, but it has nothing to do with us," he insisted. "My company is bidding on a development project in Westwood. It's been in the works for months, long before we met." "What kind of development?" Cassian hesitated. "A mixed-use building, retail space, offices and luxury apartments." "In Westwood? Where most people can barely afford their rent." Talia pulled away slightly. "What happens to the people who already live there?" "It's complicated," Cassian said. "The city's approved the zoning changes, the neighborhood is changing." "You mean gentrifying?" Talia said flatly. "Pushing out people who've lived there for generations." "That's not my intention, but it's the result, isn't it?" She looked around the glittering ballroom, suddenly feeling out of place again. "I need some air." Talia walked quickly through the crowd toward the terrace doors. Cassian followed, ignoring the curious glances from other guests. Outside, the night air was cool, and the city lights stretched out below them. "Talia, please," Cassian said when they were alone. "Let me explain." "Explain what?" "That while you were falling in love with me, you were planning to rebuild my neighborhood into something the people who live there can't afford." "It's not like that," he insisted. "The Westwood project is about revitalization, bringing in new businesses, creating jobs." "For who?" "Not for my aunt or our neighbors." Talia wrapped her arms around herself. "You know what happens when neighborhoods revitalize. Rents triple, small businesses close, people get pushed out." Cassian ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "What do you want me to do, pull out of the project? It'll happen with or without my company. I want you to understand why this matters. That neighborhood isn't just real estate. It's people's lives, their homes, their community." They stared at each other, the distance between them suddenly feeling wider than ever. The orchestra music filtered through the terrace doors, a stark contrast to the tension in the air. "I need to go home," Talia said finally. "I'll have the driver take us." "No," she interrupted. "I'll get a taxi. I need to think." Before Cassian could protest, she walked back into the ballroom and through the crowd, disappearing before he could catch up. Back at her apartment above the cafe, Talia changed out of her gown and sat by the window, watching raindrops begin to fall on the street below. In just a few months, Cassian had become central to her life. She loved him, his kindness, his efforts to change, the way he looked at her. But Victoria's words had planted a seed of doubt that she couldn't ignore. Was she just a convenient connection to the community his company wanted to transform? Had she been naive to think someone like Cassian could truly understand her world? The next morning, Aunt Margaret found her still sitting by the window. "You look like you haven't slept," Margaret observed, setting a cup of coffee beside her. "Want to talk about it?" Talia told her everything, about the gala, Victoria's insinuations, and the Westwood project. "Do you think he's using me?" she asked when she'd finished. Margaret considered her question carefully. "I've seen the way that man looks at you. If he's acting, he deserves an Oscar." She paused. "But that doesn't mean his business won't hurt people we care about." "I don't know what to do," Talia admitted. "Talk to him," Margaret advised. "Give him a chance to choose what kind of man he wants to be." Meanwhile, Cassian spent a sleepless night at his penthouse. By morning, he'd made dozens of calls, reviewed contracts, and mapped out a new approach. When the business day began, he called an emergency meeting with his project team. "We're changing direction on Westwood," he announced to their surprised faces. "I want new plans by the end of the week." "But sir," one executive protested, "we've already invested millions in the current design. The board won't approve a major change at this stage." "Let me worry about the board," Cassian said firmly. "This is happening." After the meeting, he drove to Talia's cafe, only to find it closed again. He called her cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Desperate, he went to the community center where she taught sewing classes, but was told she hadn't come in that day. As he was leaving, he ran into one of the children from her class. "Are you looking for Miss Talia?" the little girl asked. "Yes," Cassian replied. "Do you know where she is?" "She's at the old theater. They're trying to save it from being torn down." Cassian thanked her and drove to the Westwood Theater, a once grand building that had fallen into disrepair. Outside, a small group of people held signs protesting its demolition. Talia stood among them, handing out flyers to passers-by. When she saw Cassian approaching, she stiffened. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "Looking for you," he said. "You weren't answering your phone." "I needed some space." Cassian looked at the old theater behind her. "What's happening here?" "The theater's been sold to developers," she explained. "It's been part of this neighborhood for 60 years. People met their spouses here, saw their first movies here. Now it's going to be knocked down for more expensive apartments no one in this neighborhood can afford." Cassian studied the building with new eyes. Who bought it? Some company called Meridian Holdings. Cassian recognized the name, a subsidiary of one of his competitors. "Can we talk? Privately?" Reluctantly, Talia walked with him to a nearby park bench. For a moment, they sat in silence, watching people pass by. "I've been up all night," Cassian finally said, "thinking about everything you said, about Westwood, about what kind of man I want to be." "And?" Talia asked cautiously. "And you're right. I never thought about development from the perspective of the people already living there. I just saw opportunities, profits, progress." He took a deep breath. "I'm changing the Westwood project." Talia looked skeptical. "How?" "Instead of luxury apartments, half the units will be affordable housing. We'll offer reduced rent to local businesses for the retail spaces, and we'll hire from the community for both construction and permanent jobs." He paused. "It's not perfect, but it's a start. The board approved all this overnight? Not yet, but they will." Cassian's jaw set in determination. "Or I'll step down." Talia's eyes widened. "You'd do that? For what's right?" "Yes." He reached for her hand. "You're not the only one who taught me about integrity, but you're the one who made me want to live it every day." She let him hold her hand, but still looked troubled. "Cassian, what if Victoria was right? What if part of you was with me because it served your business interests? Talia, look at me, he said earnestly. The day you walked into my office with those keys, I had no idea who you were or where you lived. I fell in love with your kindness, your honesty, your strength, not your address. Rain began to fall again, light at first, then harder. Neither of them moved to seek shelter. I believe you, Talia said finally, but this isn't just about us, it's about two different worlds. Can they really come together without one destroying the other? I don't know, Cassian admitted, but I want to try. With you. 3 months later, the Westwood Community Center opened in the renovated theater building. Cassian had purchased it from Meridian Holdings and worked with local residents to preserve its historical features while adding modern facilities, including a large sewing classroom where Talia taught daily classes. The grand opening drew crowds from across the city. Cassian stood near the back, watching with pride as Talia cut the ribbon. She wore a simple dress she'd designed herself, and her smile lit up the room. Afterward, as people toured the building, Aunt Margaret approached Cassian. "You did good," she said, nudging him with her elbow. "Really good." "I had help," Cassian replied, watching Talia across the room. "You know," Margaret said thoughtfully, "when Talia's parents died, I worried she'd never find someone who deserved her. Someone who saw her value." She patted his arm. "I'm glad I was wrong." That evening, after the celebrations ended, Cassian and Talia walked hand in hand through the quiet streets of Westwood. The neighborhood was changing, but now in ways that included its residents rather than displacing them. "I have something for you," Cassian said, stopping beneath a streetlight. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Talia's breath caught. "Cassian, before you say anything," he said quickly, "this isn't a ring, not yet. I know we're still figuring things out." Curious, Talia opened the box. Inside was an old, slightly tarnished car key with a familiar leather fob, the one she'd returned to him the day they met. "I don't understand," she said. "When you gave me back these keys, you said most things don't come back once the water takes them." Cassian touched her cheek gently. "But you came back to me even after the storm." Talia looked up at him, her eyes shining. "And I always will." "Move in with me," he said suddenly. "Not to the penthouse. I'm selling it." "You are?" Cassian nodded. "I bought a brownstone. Not too big, not too fancy. Somewhere between your world and mine." He smiled. "It needs work. The ceiling leaks when it rains." "Sounds perfect," Talia laughed. "As long as you promise to help me fix it." "With my own hands," he promised, "though I might need some guidance." As they sealed their promise with a kiss, rain began to fall once more. Not the destructive downpour that had washed away his car months ago, but a gentle shower that nourished rather than destroyed. 6 months later, Talia stood in the small garden behind their brownstone, picking herbs for dinner. The house was everything Cassian had promised, neither too grand nor too humble, with a room for her sewing and space for his books. They'd repaired the leaking roof together, painted the walls, and planted flowers that bloomed even in the city's harsh environment. Inside, she could hear Cassian on the phone, his voice firm as he explained to a client why their design needed to consider the neighborhood's existing character. He'd changed since they met, not completely, but in ways that mattered. He still ran his company with the same drive and ambition, but now with a clearer sense of responsibility to the communities his buildings would affect. And she had changed too. She still worked at the cafe 3 days a week, but now she also ran the community center's arts program and had started a small business making custom clothing. Her designs had attracted attention from women who had met her at the gala, leading to a growing clientele that bridged the gap between her old world and Cassian's. The rain began to fall harder, and Talia hurried inside with her basket of herbs. Cassian was in the kitchen, attempting to chop vegetables for dinner, a skill he was slowly mastering. "Need help?" she asked, setting down her basket. "Always," he admitted with a smile. "But I'm getting better." "You are." She picked up a knife and stood beside him, their shoulders touching as they worked together. Later that evening, after dinner, they sat on their small porch watching the rain. Cassian reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. A different one this time. "I was going to wait until our anniversary next month," he said. But this feels right. Talia's heart raced as he opened the box to reveal a ring. Not an enormous diamond that would have overwhelmed her hand, but a simple band with a stone that caught the light like raindrops on glass. "Talia Greer," Cassian said, his voice steady. "With certainty, will you marry me?" She looked at the man before her, not the CEO in an expensive suit, but the man who had learned to fix leaking roofs and cook simple meals. The man who had proven that love could bridge different worlds without destroying either one. "Yes," she said, her voice full of emotion. "Yes, I will." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, the rain intensified, drumming on the roof they had repaired together. But this time the sound wasn't threatening. It was a reminder of the storm that had brought them together, a reminder that sometimes what the water takes away, it also returns, transformed and more precious than before. They sat together on the porch steps, his arm around her shoulders, her head against his chest, watching the rain fall on the garden they had planted. Two people from different worlds who had found something rare and real in each other. Something that, like the woman who had once stood at the edge of the rain with a set of lost keys, couldn't be measured in wealth or status, but only in the quiet courage of an open heart. "I love you," Cassian whispered against her hair. "I love you too," Talia replied, the rain providing a gentle backdrop to their words. And as the storm continued around them, they remained still and content in each other's arms, sheltered not by walls of glass or steel, but by something far stronger. The home they had built together, strong enough to withstand any weather that might come.